Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel, and now we are starting with the second big chapter of value-added tax, cross-border transactions. And before we go into details there, it's a good idea to remember the geography of the world from the perspective of value-added tax. So let's have a look. We will have to talk about what is inland, what is other territories of EU countries, and what is third countries. And so let's begin with the beginning, so with the inland definition. As you remember, why we have to learn all that. The VAT law or VAT legislation has a very specific approach to geography. Taxable are things which happen in the inland. That is what you know from the basics. But now you would think, if I see that something happens in the inland, that's taxable. And now, surprise, the logic is just the other way around. The legislator thinks we do not look to where something happens and then say, if it's happened in the inland, it's taxable. They do it exactly the other way around. That means they say, we look at something and say, do we want to see that as a taxable event? If so, we just say that happened in the inland by fixing the place of supply or place of delivery rules in the way that this comes out. So if the law or if the legislator wants to make something taxable, it says this happened in the inland. If, on the other hand, they don't want something to be taxable, there is a very simple approach. Just say this didn't happen in the inland. So the criterion, if something happened in the inland or not, is entirely fictitious. It's just defined with an eye to the wanted outcome. So you can never trust your eyes where you are. So for value-added tax, the first thing is don't look to reality, look to the rules. That is vital. So you never can be sure that something happened in the inland or not in the inland without giving rules for it and proofs. The same rather strange approach is also followed when it comes to the definition of what is inland from the perspective of the USDG. For example, one of the strangest things is that for purposes of value-added tax, the island of Heligoland, in German Helgoland, is not regarded as a part of the inland. The background is simple. Due to specific circumstances in the history of Heligoland, Germany did not want to levy value-added tax on the consumer of the inhabitants of Heligoland. So now, instead of writing thousands of tax exemptions with regard to if and when things happen on Heligoland, they just made a simple approach. Heligoland is not inland for VAT. That saves a mass of further rules, because if the normal rules lead to the outcome that something happened on Heligoland, whoosh, it's directly gone. It does not count anymore. Heligoland is for VAT practically and actually on the moon, so you can completely forget it. That's a trick. Huh? Here you see the definition is completely arbitrary. It has nothing to do with geography. We don't want to tax it, so we don't need to have it in the inland, so we just say Heligoland is not a part of the inland. Naturally, that only applies to VAT. It saves us a mass of more complicated special rules and details, and so that's just convenience. The same approach applies to a small German, is it a town? I don't know, have never been there. A small German piece of land which is completely enclosed by territories of the Swiss Confederation, the small municipality of Büsingen. Now Büsingen is so small that it does not really pay to levy VAT for the consume of the people in Büsingen. And so, just to simplify administrative things there is a simple solution. How can we announce on VAT in Büsingen? Just plain and simple, state that the municipality of Büsingen is not a part of the inland for the perspective of value-added tax. So that's a simple solution. We got rid of the problem. Everything's fine. There are a few other cases where it would be inconvenient to levy taxes and which for this reason also cry for a simplification. For example, when you look to international law outside taxation, the state border of Germany is somewhat away from the strand on the high sea. And now for value-added taxes, that would be highly inconvenient if the border of a country is on the sea. Imagine importation is when a good crosses the border. Now imagine there is a storm and a ship on high sea is now pressed by the storm a few or even only a half mile towards the strand, and so the ship enters German territory. So within the worst storm ever, customs personnel would have to enter the ship like pirates, storm it, subject everything on board to value-added tax due of importation, and then leave the ship again when the storm presses or blows the ship again to the high sea, and then it would all have to be filed as an exportation, and the ship owner would have to give a tax declaration for all the things exported again. It would bring no money, importation tax, then exportation, everything is given back. And the whole thing would just be bureaucratic monstrosity. And now how do you get rid of that? With a simple rule. For value-added tax purposes, the inland only begins on the strand. So everything which is German territory between the border on the sea and the strand line is not regarded as inland for VAT. So if a tanker really enters, let's say 500 meters into German territory on the high sea, that doesn't count if it leaves the border zone again. No problem. Only if it reaches the land territory, then that would have importation consequences. Well, simple solution. So we have something which states, well, the area between the border on the sea and the strand is not part of the inland, as well as ships and aircrafts in international territory are not part of the German inland. So ships on high sea and aircraft in international airspace are regarded as part of the territory of the state to which they belong, where they are registered under international law. For VAT, that would be a monstrosity. So the rule is they are not part of the inland when they are not within the territory of a state. So basic and simple approach. Sometimes some goods are in international shipment. They are brought from one country, let's say Norway, to another country, South Africa, and they are just brought to the inland temporarily because they are unloaded from ship A and then reloaded up on ship B, which goes on from Hamburg, let's say, to South Africa, whereas the first ship brought them from Norway to Hamburg. So it's just a change ship. Why the goods are unloaded to the harbor and then they leave the harbor again. That would also bring along importation duties and afterwards paying back the importation duties because the goods are exported. Much of bureaucracy, no fun, no money for the state. So in such cases, the rule would be we just regard a part of that harbor as not part of the inland, where it is then secured that the goods cannot enter the inland without being checked and then taxed. So naturally there have been parts of a harbor labeled as not being part of the inland. These are parts of a harbor where goods can only be stored and then leave again for exportation for other third countries, or if they leave the harbor towards the rest of the inlet, they would then be subjected to importation tax. So these so-called free harbor areas are just a way to avoid bureaucratic, senseless paperwork. And so this is also officially done by just saying this is not a part of the inlet. And the idea is, if we were so bureaucratic that we would treat all these things exactly as importation and exportation, then ships would probably avoid that harbor for unloading and reloading to another ship. Well, these free harbor things were allowed by the EU as a measure to simplify bureaucracy, as long as no real consume, the real VAT, our revenue is lost. And you know, between enterprises, there is usually no real tax revenue, definitive revenue for the state, because the output VAT of the one entrepreneur is refunded as input VAT of the other entrepreneur. So you can do that game with the free harbors, apart from cases where real consume happens in such a free harbor area. And so Germany obtained the permission to treat all these things as irrelevant, apart from the cases where actual consume happens in such a free harbor area. Then it must still be taxed. And now, surprise, it should not surprise you how the German law treats these things. German law says the area of a free harbor is not a part of the inlet. However, if there is consume in such a free port, then the consume is deemed to have not happened in the free port area, but in the rest of the inlet. So it's treated as happening in the inlet. So absolute madness if you think it's geography where we look to. Absolute consequential and logical if you have in mind, okay, we always define things as happening in the inlet or as part of the inlet if we want to have tax consequences. If we want to get rid of any tax consequences, we say it's not in the inlet. That is also later beyond all these rules for the place of supply of a service or the place of supply of a delivery. So the only thing you need to keep in mind from all this is how the legislator plays around with the term inland. We don't look to geography. The Freeports even are a very specific thing, because the Freeports are not a part of the inland from the perspective of Germany, but for the tax treatment by other states, they will be regarded as Germany. So this is a kind of an area which is for the one state a part of Germany, for all the other states, and for Germany it is not for VAT purposes. That's even a very strange thing. So from the perspective of French or Italian law, sending something to a German Freeport area is just sending something to Germany, and the tax consequences for the French deliverer or the Italian deliverer will be the same as always. Only the Germans will draw no consequences because it ends up in a Freeport area. By the way, the same, let's say, dualistic nature of a Freeport is also given in other countries. So if you have a Spanish Freeport, for Spanish taxation, that will be not inland of Spain, but for if you are German and send something to Spain, you don't need to care about if it's Spanish inland or not. For the German law, sending something to the Freeport of, I believe there is one in Barcelona, does not really count. It does not matter for you. It's a regular translation with the transaction, with the Spanish country. And only the Spaniards, for reason of simplification, don't draw the consequences for that taxation if it's a Freeport area where you send something to. So strange things are going on in geographic areas when it comes to VAT. Um, so Freeports have a dualistic nature. All the other exceptions from the inlet definition, so Heligoland, Büsingen, the part of the territory between the sea border and the strand, the ships and aircraft in international territories, all that is also valid as being not part of Germany from the perspective of all the other EU states too. So if something sells something, someone sells something to the island of Heligoland, this is also not happening in Germany from the perspective of any other EU country, but it happens in a third territory. Other member states, by the way, have similar inland definitions. They also have areas which they regard as not being part of their inland for various purposes or various reasons. The Canary Islands, Ceuta and Melilla do not form a part of the Spanish inland for VAT. Greenland is not a part of Denmark and not even a part of the EU because it left the EU some decades ago. The Faroe Islands are also not regarded as part of Denmark for value-added tax. The Åland Islands, I hope I pronounced them correctly, but it was nearly certainly wrong. They are a Finnish group of islands, and they are not considered as a part of Finland for value-added tax. Some French territories are not regarded as inland of French or France, although they are forming a part of the French motherland territory legally. Mount Athos is not considered a part of Greece for VAT. Certain territories belonging to Italy are ignored for value-added tax. And some parts of the Netherlands which are not in Europe are not considered as inland of the Netherlands. So there are certain things, certain peculiarities. Some territories have even special status. So Northern Ireland is considered as part of the EU if it has to do with the delivery of a good, because for trade of goods, Northern Ireland is part of the EU still. But for trade in services, Northern Ireland is a third territory. So here it is highly important to distinguish correctly between if something is a delivery of a good or if something is a service. Then the Principality of Monaco has also a special tax status because for the purpose of value-added tax it is considered as a part of France. That is due to the fact that the Monegassean state always has exactly the same value-added tax laws as France has. They always take it over. I don't know if even the money goes to France or is shared between the two, but as the legislation for VAT in Monaco is exactly the same as in France, and that is secured by international agreements or so. There is even for value-added tax in the VAT directive the rule that for VAT purposes Monaco is a part of France. That even leads to the effect that if somebody applies for a value-added tax identification number, you will, as a citizen of Monaco, receive a French number. Well, in Europe, here is a typing mistake, not in the EU, but in Europe, we have third territories. And well, third territories are basically all territories which do not form part of the inland of an EU state. So all territories which do not form part of the EU, naturally, and all parts of an EU state which are ignored. For example, Heligoland is a third territory, Büsingen is a third territory, Canary Islands, so Lanzarote, Tenerife, and so on are third territories. And you must also keep in mind that in Europe itself, there are certain states which still do not form a part of the EU. So Andorra, between Spain and France, Gibraltar, San Marino, naturally, by the way, the United Kingdom, the Vatican State, then the three EEA states, the European Economic Area, Norway, Iceland, and Liechtenstein, and also Switzerland. They all do not belong to the EU and therefore form third territories under the VAT perspective. Well, let's simply sum up these things here. If you want to have a look on the relevant provisions where you can find the definitions in German law, just look into 1.2 of the USDG. It defines what is inland and what is abroad or a foreign territory. And you also find definitions for the territory of the EU or the community territory or customs area of the EU. And the remaining or the rest of the community territory, that is all the community territory without the inland of Germany. And you also find the definition there, what is a third state or third territory. So if you look for geography in the German Value-Added Tax Act, the Umsatzsteuergesetz, look just to paragraph 1, section 2 and paragraph 1, section 2a. The same can be found in the Value-Added Tax Directive of the EU. That is the famous Directive 2006/112/EC, and the relevant provisions which give you the overview of what is inland and what is not inland of EU states under VAT perspective. That is found in Articles 5 to 7. And for the special status of Northern Ireland that has not been entered into the VAT directive text, that is something which you can find out if you have a look on the withdrawal agreement between the UK and the EU. And if you look for that text of the withdrawal agreement, just use Google and type it in. There will be quickly a link to the official text of that withdrawal agreement. It is very, very big, so don't do it. At least don't read it. Okay, enough for this small little video. See you back soon for the next one. Goodbye.